He poured the wine too slowly and smiled like it meant nothing. Name's Caleb, 52, freelance photographer. The glass I didn't drink still sits in my freezer next to the ice pack I used that night when Diane nearly collapsed. Ever wonder what families hide behind politeness? Tell me, what would you have done at that table? It wasn't the words, it was the way he said them. Gerald raised the glass like he was offering a contract, not a toast. To your next big break, Caleb, he said, voice smooth as the burgundy he poured. The rim of the glass glinted in the chandelier's light, and he smiled just a moment too long. I managed a nod and took the glass, careful not to let my fingers brush his. Rachel beamed the way she always did when her father gave me a rare compliment. Her hand squeezed mine under the table, a silent, hopeful nudge. The dining room smelled of rosemary garlic and furniture polish. Diane had set the table with gold-trimmed plates and napkins folded into little swans. The roast chicken sat proudly in the center, flanked by bowls of asparagus, fingerling potatoes, and something I couldn't name, but knew I shouldn't pronounce with confidence. Spring in Portland was always unpredictable. Outside, the sky hung low and gray, but in here it was all warmth and gloss, at least on the surface. You're a lucky man, Gerald said, slicing into his chicken. Not everyone lands a teaching contract at your age. I smiled thinly. Adjunct, just a semester. Still, he waved his fork a foot in the door. We all start somewhere. Somewhere, I thought, but rarely in a room like this. Rachel leaned in toward her mother. Mom, this looks amazing. Diane smiled. Oh, it's nothing. Just a little something special for family. Marissa, quiet as ever, passed the bread without a word. Ethan chewed mechanically, his eyes on the glass in my hand. I watched the swirl of red in the goblet. Something shimmered at the surface like a slow, unfurling film. Subtle. Maybe imagined. Maybe not. Gerald was watching me. Not staring. Just watching. The way someone might glance at a fuse they'd just lit. Rachel didn't notice. She was already reaching for the salad bowl. I leaned slightly forward. Diane let me help pass, that I said, motioning toward the bread plate near her glass. She smiled politely, turning. And with a practiced sleight of hand, something I'd learned back in undergrad bartending days, I switched our glasses. Mine, untouched, slid to her side. Hers, now in front of me, looked perfectly ordinary. No one noticed. Not even her. We ate. Talked. Gerald told a story about his latest client, Wynne. Diane laughed a little too loudly, and then she coughed. Once, then again. She reached for her water, knocking the spoon off her plate. I'm so sorry, she said, voice tight. I think maybe shellfish in the stuffing. There's no shellfish, Rachel said quickly, concerned. Diane stood. Her face had gone a little pale. She smiled apologetically. Excuse me a moment. Gerald was already rising. I'll help. No need, she said softly, hand up. Just a moment. I watched her leave. Watched Gerald sit slowly, not following her. His smile never dropped, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed a flicker of something else. Not worry, not guilt. Anticipation, maybe. I looked back at the table. The glass now in front of me, the one I hadn't drunk from, had no shimmer, no strange film, just wine. Ordinary and safe. Rachel's fork paused mid-air. She okay? Probably just nerves, Gerald offered. She hasn't been sleeping well. But I saw it. The quick dart of his eyes toward my glass. The way he didn't touch his wine until Diane had left the room. The way he adjusted his napkin without looking down. Dinner continued. Plates emptied. Conversation turned to the upcoming family vacation to Cannon Beach, which I hadn't agreed to attend. Gerald offered to cover the lodging again. I nodded, smiled when expected. I didn't drink the wine. When dessert came, a strawberry tart with too much powdered sugar, I excused myself to the kitchen. I rinsed my fork, opened the freezer, and quietly tucked a piece of the ice from the original glass into a sandwich bag. I didn't know what I was saving it for, but something told me I might need it. We said our goodbyes in the driveway. Diane didn't reappear. Gerald said she needed rest. Rachel kissed her father's cheek, laughing gently at some joke I didn't catch. In the car, Rachel asked, "Was that weird? Her getting sick like that?" I hesitated. Maybe just the food. She nodded, satisfied. "Dad was nice tonight, wasn't he? I think he's warming up to you." I didn't answer. My hand stayed on the gear shift longer than it needed to. Rachel once told me, "My dad's never wrong, not even when he is." And now I wondered what it would mean if this time he was exactly as wrong as I feared. I didn't tell her what I saw. Not yet. But the glass I didn't drink might end up being the one that saved me. "Did you notice anything strange about my mom last night?" Rachel asked it while pouring the last of the coffee. The sunlight caught the steam as it rose, curling above her shoulder like a question she wasn't quite ready to hear answered. I stirred my cup too slowly. The spoon scraped the ceramic louder than it needed to be. "She seemed off," I said finally. "Probably just tired." Rachel nodded, curling one knee under herself at the kitchen table. The radio in the background droned on NPR Saturday programming, someone discussing drought patterns in California. Outside the window, the neighbor's cat prowled the garden tail, flicking. Normal things, all of it. But the air between us wasn't normal. "She didn't even come out to say goodbye," Rachel said. "That's not like her. I didn't say what I wanted to, that the woman who got sick wasn't the one Gerald meant to target. Instead, I bit into a slice of over-toasted sourdough, the kind Rachel always bought from the Saturday market on 23rd. Too crisp, like we'd both forgotten how long it had been in the toaster. The kind of small mistake that doesn't feel so small when you're already holding your breath. Rachel's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, smiled, and walked out of the room. I waited until I heard the bathroom door click shut. Then I reached for my camera. I hadn't planned to look. But something in Gerald's toast, it stayed with me. The weight in his voice. The way he raised the glass like it was a stage cue, not a gesture of goodwill. I scrolled through the pictures from last night. Nothing unusual at first. Rachel laughing, Diane posing with the chicken like it was a trophy, Ethan mid-eye roll. And then one frame caught me. Gerald, just before the toast, glancing at his watch. It wasn't the glance that unsettled me. It was the intent behind it. As if the timing mattered. As if there was something calibrated. I sat back. The cat outside had settled onto the fence post, blinking lazily toward the sun. A normal day. A good day, even. But I couldn't let it go. I drove to the lab around noon. Jason worked out of a squat building tucked behind a cannabis dispensary and a bike shop. The kind of place you'd walk past if you didn't know what you were looking for. He looked up when I stepped through the door. "Caleb," he said, surprised, but smiling. "You photographing another wedding?" "Not exactly," I said. "You got a minute?" He motioned me in. We hadn't talked in years, not since I photographed his daughter's ceremony out in Hood River. But some favors don't expire. I handed him the bag, still sealed and fogged with freezer condensation. Jason raised an eyebrow. "Something I should be worried about." "Just a personal thing. Can you run a talk screen? I don't need a full panel. Just if anything's out of place." He studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "I'll call you later." I didn't explain. He didn't ask. By the time I got home, Rachel was in the garden, earbuds in, kneeling beside the tomato plants. She waved when I walked by the window. I waved back. My hand didn't quite feel like mine. I spent the afternoon editing headshots for a law firm I didn't care about. The kind of job you take when the house payment comes faster than the inspiration. But the images blurred. Every time I looked at a shadow on someone's cheek, I thought of the shimmer in that wine glass. Every time I adjusted contrast, I saw Gerald smile. That evening, Jason called. "I'm not asking what this is about," he said, "but there were benzos in the sample. Diazepam, specifically." I didn't say anything. "Not lethal," he continued, "but enough to make someone dizzy. Maybe lose time. Definitely enough to get someone in trouble if they're behind the wheel." "Thanks," I said. My voice didn't sound right. Caleb Jason's tone changed. "Be careful. That stuff's not for fun." I hung up. I didn't tell Rachel. Not yet. That night as we lay in bed, her back curved gently against mine, I stared at the ceiling fan. It moved slowly, wobbling just a bit on the left turn, like it always had, like something slightly out of balance. Rachel sighed in her sleep, peaceful, trusting. I thought of her mother, pale and dazed, leaving the table. I thought of Gerald adjusting his napkin and not flinching. I thought of the glass that almost made it to my lips. And I started to wonder not just what else I had missed, but what else they had planned. The picnic was the kind of event that looked perfect in photos. Bright balloons, checkered tablecloths weighed down with potato salad, and bottled lemonade kids weaving between folding chairs with frosting-stained mouths. But I'd always been more interested in what people weren't looking at. Marissa found me near the grill, poking at a tray of ribs, like I was invested in barbecue technique. She didn't say anything at first, just stood next to me, arms folded, sunglasses hiding whatever she was thinking. Then she nudged something beneath the tablecloth. A small silver flash drive. The kind you pick up in a checkout line and forget 5 minutes later. "This doesn't belong to me anymore," she said, barely above the hum of conversation. Then she smiled, too wide, too sudden, and walked off toward her son's balloon fight. I didn't pick it up right away. Instead, I sipped my lemonade, watched Rachel laugh with Ethan near the swing set, and thought about all the things that look normal from a distance. Later that night, when the picnic was over and the house had quieted, I plugged the drive into my editing laptop in the studio. The room was dim except for the glow of the screen, my old desk lamp humming faintly. The house outside was dark and still. Rachel asleep, the city paused. The folder on the drive was unmarked. Just one video. 37 minutes. I hesitated before pressing play. The footage was grainy shot on a home security camera, maybe a phone tucked in a flower vase. The angle looked toward the Dunmore dining room, the same one from our dinner a few nights ago. At first it was nothing, just Diane collecting dishes, her movements slow. Then Gerald entered. They didn't know they were being recorded. That much was obvious. Diane set a plate down and turned toward him. She looked so pale, she said, "She'll be fine," Gerald replied, loosening his collar. "It wasn't meant for her. She drank the wrong glass, Gerald." There was a pause. Then he said calmly, "He wasn't supposed to switch them." My stomach went still. "It was just to make him miss the gallery opening," Diane said. "That's what you said?" Gerald shrugged. "And he did miss it. Mission accomplished. It wasn't right." Neither was Thomas. Gerald replied, suddenly sharper. "But we didn't lose sleep then." Diane sat down heavily. "She still doesn't know," she said. "And she doesn't need to." The name hit harder than the rest, Thomas. A name Rachel only mentioned once early in our relationship. A college boyfriend, a messy breakup, the kind of thing we all supposedly carry and forget. I'd always assumed it was just a young mistake. But now Gerald poured himself another drink on the video, still speaking like he was reading from a playbook. "Plant enough doubt," he said, "and she'll walk away on her own. Just like last time." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just strategy. I paused the video, heart pounding. The quiet of the studio felt suddenly too loud. This wasn't just about a drink. It wasn't about me missing an art show or about Gerald being a manipulative father-in-law trying to protect his daughter from an underachieving photographer. This was patterned, practiced. I played the video again, slower, looking for other details. Diane wringing her hands, Gerald pacing like a man who'd done this before. The phrase, "just like last time," echoing over the audio like a hammer. Back in college, Rachel had dropped out of a gallery internship program suddenly. She said the schedule was too intense. She never told me why Thomas vanished. Now I had an answer. Gerald made people disappear subtly, quietly, with just enough friction that the victim walked away on their own. No confrontation. No mess. Just a seed of doubt watered with charm. I ejected the flash drive, holding it like it might burn my fingers. There was no label, no date, no proof of anything except the feeling in my gut. I walked out to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared out at the backyard. The motion light clicked on. A raccoon rustled through the compost bin. Normal things. Quiet things. Rachel was asleep. I knew, because the hallway light didn't flicker. She always turned it off when she went to bed. I used to think it was a habit. Now I saw it differently. She came from a household where light could betray what silence protected. I stood there a long time, glass sweating in my hand before I went to bed. And for the first time I knew this wasn't just about me. It never was. The text came at 6:03 a.m. Let's talk. Just us. Gerald. I stared at it for a full minute, phone buzzing faintly against the kitchen counter. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a summons. The kind of message someone sends when they think the room's already been decided, and all you're allowed is a seat. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I brewed coffee the way I always did, slow drip black. Outside, the sky over Portland was still gray, the kind of light that makes everything feel suspended waiting. 2 hours later, I was sitting across from him in a private lounge at the Lake Oswego Golf and Country Club. The room smelled like cedar polish and expensive apologies. Leather chairs faced each other like two sides of a chessboard. A single bourbon waited at each setting, 2 fingers deep untouched. Gerald looked rested. Too rested. "Caleb," he said, standing just enough to imply courtesy without conviction. "Appreciate you coming. I figured it'd be better than dragging this into another family dinner," I replied, sitting down. He chuckled. "Ah, yes. Let's not disturb the roast chicken." We sat in silence for a beat. The jazz in the background tried to smooth out the tension, but it only made it feel more artificial, like a soundtrack for something uglier. I wanted to clear up some things. Gerald began leaning back like a man trying not to reveal how much he rehearsed this. "About Diane. She's been on a new medication, anxiety mostly. That night she may have mixed things up. Pills wine sometimes people don't realize." I didn't blink. She looked sick before the wine touched her lips. His fingers tapped the rim of his glass. "You're suggesting what exactly?" I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope, slid it across the polished table. He didn't open it, but I knew he knew what was inside. "Lab results," I said from the ice. Jason ran them. "You remember Jason, don't you? His daughter's wedding. You gave a very moving toast." Still, he didn't move. "There's also a copy of the footage Marissa gave me." Diane and you post-dinner. It's all very candid. His smile never quite broke, but it thinned the way a wall might crack before it caves. Is this blackmail, Caleb? No, I said quietly. It's recognition. He finally took a sip of his bourbon, slow and deliberate. When he set the glass down, the sound echoed like a gavel. You really don't understand the position you're in, do you? He asked. I could ruin you. Your business, your reputation, photographers are easy to replace. Son-in-laws, not so much. I leaned forward slightly. I didn't marry Rachel for you to approve me. I married her because she already did. He laughed, sharp, humorless. That's not how these things work. Rachel listens. Eventually. She always has. I stared at him, really stared this time. The man who believed control was love in its highest form. The kind of man who didn't raise daughters, he managed them. Is that what happened to Thomas? I asked. Something flickered in his eyes. Not surprise, not quite. More like annoyance that I'd said it aloud. He adjusted his cufflink. You should ask her about Thomas. Maybe I will, I said. But not today. He leaned back in his chair, that familiar smugness settling in again, like dust in a room no one visits. You've got potential, Caleb. You're smart, quiet. You know how to work a room without becoming it. That's valuable. I'm offering you a position junior consultant. Benefits. Travel, a future. It was surreal, like being offered a promotion in a company I never applied to. I have a future, I said, standing. And it doesn't require an invitation from you. He stared up at me, the bourbon untouched now. You'll regret this. Maybe I said. But I won't wonder who I was when I said no. As I walked out, I realized I didn't feel triumphant. There wasn't a scorecard, just a clean breath in my chest and the sound of my shoes on marble floor. The kind of silence that didn't need filling. Outside, the clouds had finally broken, revealing a sliver of sun. The parking lot shimmered in the light drizzle, and somewhere in the distance I heard the dull clack of golf balls being hit precision without meaning. Maybe this wasn't the first time Gerald tried to rewrite Rachel's love story, but it would be the last. Bethany's voice was cautious, but not cold. You're the first person who's ever called to ask what really happened, she said. I was sitting in my office, the one-room studio I'd converted behind the house. It was late, almost 10. A desk lamp pooled amber light onto a scattering of negatives, a cup of cold tea, and a notebook I hadn't touched in months. Rachel was out visiting a friend. That's what she said, anyway. I wasn't sure you'd pick up, I told her. I wasn't sure I should, she said. But then I remembered how much Thomas loved her, and how much it hurt when no one listened to him. Silence sat between us for a moment. Then she began. Thomas wasn't perfect, Bethany said, but he was good to her. Steady. The kind of man who made her laugh when she got too in her own head. Rachel lit up around him in ways I never saw again. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. He proposed in May, she continued. They were supposed to get married that fall, but then photos showed up. Of Thomas with another woman. Texts, receipts, fake. I didn't think so at the time. Neither did Rachel. But later Thomas told me he never sent them. He thought her dad was behind it. Said Gerald had always treated him like a project that failed inspection. Did Rachel know she wouldn't let herself believe it? But she wrote him a letter. Said, I don't know who to believe anymore. So I'm choosing silence. My chest ached in a way I couldn't name, like a bruise blooming beneath old bone. When I hung up, I just sat there. The room hummed with quiet. I flipped through the files on my desk, looking for something, anything that might ground me back in the present. That's when the email came in from Thomas. Subject for Rachel, and maybe for you too. Attached were a handful of old photos, Rachel in a green sweater, Thomas beside her, both laughing unposed. Then a scan of the letter Bethany mentioned, written in Rachel's looping, uncertain script. I don't know who to believe anymore, but I hope one day someone will make me feel safe enough to try again. I didn't know if I was that person, but I wanted to be. Later that night, looking for something to keep my hands busy, I pulled down a box labeled Craft Supplies, Diane, from the attic. It had been shoved behind some old canvases left untouched for years. Inside were tubes of dried paint, a few cracked brushes, and a worn leather folio. Inside the folio were sketches. They weren't just good. They were alive. Women dancing in half-shadow, a child curled up beside a river, a woman holding a bird in her hands like it might sing, if only she stayed still enough. All signed D. Whitman, Diane's maiden name. I traced the charcoal lines with my eyes, stunned. Diane, who now rearranged silverware before dinner like it was a ritual of control, once drew tenderness. Movement. Longing. There was a list folded into one of the pages. Art schools to apply to RISD, Cooper Union, SVA. All crossed out. At the bottom, Gerald says there's no future in dreams. The pain came quick this time. Not rage, not even sorrow. Just mourning. For Diane. For Rachel. For the versions of them that never made it past someone else's fear. I was still sitting there, folio open, when I heard the front door close. Caleb Rachel's voice drifted in. I froze, then stood stepping out of the studio as she came down the hall. She looked tired. Not in the physical sense, the kind of tired you wear behind the eyes. "What are you doing up?" she asked. Instead of answering, I held up the letter. She stepped closer, read the first few lines. Her breath caught. "Where did you—" Bethany. Then Thomas. She sat down without being asked, read the rest in silence. When she was done, she didn't cry, just stared at the letter like it might open if she looked hard enough. "They made me doubt him," she said. "I thought I was protecting myself." "You were," I said gently, "but they weren't." She glanced at the portfolio in my hands. "What's that?" "Your mother's," I said, handing it over. She opened it slowly, the way someone opens a long, sealed box in a basement. She never showed me any of this. Maybe she couldn't. Rachel stared at one of the drawings, a woman with her back turned, wind pulling at her hair like memory. She told me once that art was a hobby, not a life. I nodded. Sometimes we say things loudest when we've buried them the deepest. We sat like that for a long while. Then I said it. "This is what they do." She looked at me. "They don't break you," I said. "They replace you. One compromise at a time." Rachel's voice was steady, but it struck me like thunder on still water. "We're all going to their house tonight," she said. "No more lies. And this time you're bringing the camera." It wasn't a question. She stood at the doorway of my studio, hair tucked behind her ears, the evening light pooling gold around her, like a halo of resolve. In her hands was the letter from Thomas, creased from how many times she must have read it since. "I'm done wondering," she added, softer now. "It's time they hear me." By 7, we were pulling into the circular driveway of the Dunmore house. Same pristine hedges. Same motion sensor lights blinking on like they recognized you and judged what you brought. Inside the dining room had been set as always. Polished silver. Wine chilled. Roast pork this time, like nothing had ever fractured. Everyone was there. Gerald at the head of the table. Diane with her practiced smile. Marissa and Ethan seated side by side, noticeably quieter than usual. But this time I brought something else, my tripod, and a small camera. For the family archive, I said, simply placing it near the buffet cabinet. Gerald's eyebrows raised. Well, that's a bit formal, isn't it? I didn't answer. Neither did Rachel. She only looked at her mother, then her father, and sat down. For the first few minutes, conversation stumbled through safe topics. Weather traffic, a new bakery on Hawthorne that Diane loved, but Gerald thought was overrated sourdough. Then I pressed play. The screen lit up with the footage Marissa had given me, the one she said didn't belong to her anymore. The lounge, the voices, the line that changed everything. He wasn't supposed to switch glasses. Diane's face dropped. Gerald's eyes flicked toward the power outlet, as if wondering if he could pull the cord fast enough. I spoke. The lab confirmed benzodiazepines in the ice. That was no misunderstanding. Then I held up the letter. Read it aloud. Rachel's own handwriting from a decade ago. Ethan looked at Gerald like he'd never seen him before. Marissa didn't speak, but the way she moved her hand slightly, just enough to touch Ethan's wrist, said more than silence ever could. Rachel leaned forward. You don't get to write my story anymore. The room went still. Diane opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Gerald tried. Rachel, sweetie? She raised a hand. No, you don't get to sweetie me out of this. Then with a calm that almost broke me, she said, I'm pregnant. Gerald flinched, just barely, but enough. Diane's hand flew to her mouth. Ethan blinked. Marissa's face softened. I looked at Gerald, then my voice level. This child will never be your project. Silence. Even the clock on the wall seemed to forget how to tick. Gerald cleared his throat. What is it you want? I didn't even glance at Rachel. We'd already talked about this on the drive over. There were no conditions, no ultimatums, nothing I said, which is why you can't control it. We stood. Rachel took my hand. At the door, I looked back one last time. Gerald looked older suddenly, smaller. Diane was still frozen. And yet I couldn't hate them. Not completely, because some people don't need punishment. They need absence. We left without another word. Weeks passed. The gallery opened mid-September, a soft reception with one and low jazz. I hung one of Rachel's favorite photos near the back. A little girl on a swing in the middle of the woods captured just before the arc turned downward. Freedom caught mid-air. Most didn't notice the woman who entered near closing. Diane, in a long coat, no makeup eyes that looked like they'd cried but weren't crying anymore. She didn't speak, just stood before the photo, long enough for it to mean something. She didn't need to say anything. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived at our house. No return address. Inside was a deed to the cabin in Tillamook. A notarized trust in the baby's name. No note, just signatures. Rachel sat down slowly, staring at the papers. What do we do with this? She asked. I smiled faintly. We name the baby something that doesn't rhyme with legacy. She laughed. And I swear it was the sound of something healing. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is set the camera down and walk away knowing you told the truth. I didn't expose them to ruin them. I did it so the story could belong to the right people again. In families, love gets tangled up with legacy, but one should never come at the cost of the other. If this story reminds you of something unspoken in your own family, I'd love to hear how you found your way through it. We don't heal by staying silent. We heal by being seen.